The next attribute we're going to look at is glass. This one you probably will use if you do the magnifying glass or maybe the beer bottle. Um, you don't have to make, if you want to make the beer bottle gray, just like the reference, you can. If you want to make it a colored glass and take it one step further, you can do that as well. You won't be graded on the fact that you added color information to any of these models, so the only stuff you're really graded on this month is that you added tertiary detail and you have the bump maps applied properly and have a little bit of spec turned on. But if you want to go the extra mile and apply a preset to it or try to adjust the PXR shader yourself, you're more than welcome to, and it can make for a nice finished piece. So with glass, you're going to want to turn the refraction gain and the reflection gain to 1. We need to make sure we turn the diffuse gain off because those two will kind of fight with each other. I would also turn the primary specular face and edge color to black. So glass has its own reflections, and then when we add additional through that spec, it might look odd. If we want to tint the refractive color, that's going to tint your glass. And you can, under the Advanced tab, change your refractive index to make your surface look like other transparent materials, like plastics, diamonds, water, honey, and you can Google this value. So if you look up refractive index of honey, it'll actually come back and tell you what that is. So again, you don't have to use this attribute this month, but it can be a really fun one to play with. So with the sphere selected out here, I'm going to turn, well, we can leave the fuzz on, that's fine, but we're going to turn the specular, primary, face color, and edge color to black. And then we're going to turn our diffuse gain all the way off. And then down here we'll look at glass. We're going to turn refraction gain to 1 and reflection gain to 1. And let's just render it like this and see what we get. Okay, so we're kind of getting glass here, but it doesn't really fully look like glass. And I'm going to tell you why. There's a couple things we need to do, so I'm going to hit escape. So if you are choosing to put glass on your objects, you need to trace your light paths to make it look realistic. So I'm going to click on my dome light. So I just kind of selected the backdrop and it came up in my attribute editor. If yours is not selecting this way, you can go to Windows, Outliner, and just grab your dome light there. In the attribute editor, if you go to Advanced, you want to trace light paths. So tracing light paths is going to allow it to go kind of through this object and do proper calculations. We'll also want to go to our render settings, and when I'm doing glass, I like to allow caustics. This does increase the render times, but you can get some really cool effects with it. And your max diffuse depth, put this up to 3. Max specular at 4 is probably okay. If you want to go to 6 or 8 for this sphere, you can do that. You'll learn about these ray depths in later classes, but right now if you just kind of follow my guidelines, don't go over 3 with max diffuse. I wouldn't go over 8 with max specular. There shouldn't be many models in here that you need to go above those values with, and they will dramatically add to your render times. So now you can see we're really kind of rendering this realistically. We're getting that refraction of objects through the other side. And this just looks kind of far more realistic this way. If you add thickness to your object, so right now it's looking at this as kind of a solid piece of glass. Because these shaders are physically accurate, if I select this in face mode, shift right click and extrude, and let's just extrude a little thickness here, and let's render this again. Now it's looking at it like a hollow piece of glass, but there's some thickness to the walls, right? So if we look at this one, it looks like a solid piece of glass, and if we look at this one, the interior is hollow, but there's some thickness to the walls of the glass, and we can kind of see that thickness being refracted to the edges, right? Notice this is definitely taking longer to render with some thickness there. And and you may need to up. If you have thickness like this, 3 should do fine for the diffuse. But if it was a still shot up close, you'd maybe go to 4 with it, just because of how many walls there are to this glass that we're looking through. Same thing with the spec, you can maybe take it, we have it at 8, maybe I'd put it to 10. The more kind of complexity you have here, you're going to end up needing more ray depth, but it gives you diminishing returns at a point too, where you just won't visually notice a difference, but it's going to dramatically increase your render times each time you go up a little bit. So I'd stay with the numbers I showed you. I wouldn't really go much higher unless you just want to kind of play around a little bit, knowing that you're going to drop those settings down. But look at how long it's taking now just to get 84% of this rendered because of the amount of complexity that's added to this shader. So go ahead, play with the glass. The other thing I said you could play with on glass was the refractive index, and that is under advanced. And then the refractive color. So this will tint my glass. Let's say I want a nice blue for my glass. And then refractive index, you can go lower with this value, so like 1.3. Let's hit escape and hit R. And you can see this correlates directly to how light's kind of refracted through here. Okay, so now it's much darker because the way the light is being refracted through. If we put this to, let's say, 1.65, hit escape, hit R, now the light's being bent in a slightly different way. And so how we perceive it is going to look different. Also, we're having trouble seeing through this right now. So if we go to the refractive color, how you adjust the value here, so saturation is the color of the glass. The value is going to kind of affect the refraction and how much light kind of gets through this, right? So you can see it's even darker now. Let's hit escape. Let's take this almost all the way up. Hit R. And now we're definitely seeing through the glass more. So you can really affect kind of how much you see through the glass when you start adding color by playing with the value in that channel. There's one more option down here, thin. And thin would be if you didn't have any faces extruded and you didn't want it to feel like a solid piece of glass. So I wouldn't necessarily use it because we extruded those faces with this. But if we had those faces deleted and we wanted to feel like it had a thin wall and it wasn't a solid piece of glass, we could check that checkbox on.